At that time, he was not against British government. He only demanded for dignity and equality of citizens. Ambulance corps. He even helped British Army in the war 1899-1902 against Netherlands settlers. He helped run ambulances for wounded British soldiers. For this service, he was awarded with the medal Kesari Hind in 1915. Role in India's national movement. The third and the final phase of the Indian national movement, 1917 to 1947, is known as Gandhian era. During this period, Mahatma Gandhi became the undisputed leader of the national movement. His principles of non-violence and satyagraha were employed against the British government. Gandhi made the nationalist movement a mass movement. Satyagraha, a passive resistance or civil disobedience. Literal meaning insistent on truth or truth force. Gandhi evolved the technique during his stay in South Africa, which was based on truth and non-violence. Its basic tenets were a satyagrahi was not to submit to what he considered as wrong, but was to always remain truthful, non-violent, and fearless. A true satyagrahi would never bow before the evil, whatever the consequence. He should be ready to accept suffering in his struggle against the evildoer. This suffering was to be a part of his love for truth. Even while carrying out his struggle against the evildoer, a true satyagrahi would love the evildoer. Hatred would be alien to his nature. Only the brave and the strong could practice satyagraha, which was not for the weak and cowards. Even violence was preferred to cowardice. Champaran Satyagraha, fast civil disobedience movement. Rajkumar Shukla asked Gandhi to look into the problems of the indigo planters. The European planters had been forcing peasants to grow indigo on 3 out of 23 part of the total land, called Tin Katia system. Towards the end of the 19th century, German synthetic dyes replaced indigo. European planters demanded high rents and illegal dues from the peasants. Besides, the peasants were forced to sell the produce at prices fixed by European. When Gandhi reached the Champaran to prove into the matter, the authorities ordered him to leave the area at once. Gandhi defied the order and preferred to face the punishment. He did a survey by himself. He asked the peasants to not grow indigo and stop giving taxes. This passive resistance of civil disobedience of an unjust order was a noble method at that time. Finally, the authorities retreated and permitted Gandhi to make an inquiry. Government appointed a committee to look into the matter and nominated Gandhi as a member. Gandhi was able to convince the authorities that the Tinkatia system should be abolished. The peasants should be compensated for the illegal dues extracted from them. As a compromise with the planters, he agreed that the only 25% of the money taken should be compensated. With a decade, the planters left the area. During the Champaran Satyagraha, Rajendra Prasad came into the contact of Gandhi. Kheda Satyagraha, 1918, fast non-cooperation movement. Because of the drought in 1918, crops failed in Kheda district of the Gujarat. According to the revenue code, if the yield was less than 1/4 of the normal produce, the farmers were entitled to remission. The authorities refused to grant remission. Gandhi supported the peasants' cause and asked them to withhold revenue. Finally, government listened to Gandhi and granted remission to peasants. During the Kheda Satyagraha, many young nationalists such as Sardar Patel and Indulal Yagnik became Gandhi's follower. Ahmedabad Mill Strike, first hunger strike. Gandhi now intervened in a dispute between mill owners of Ahmedabad and the workers over the issue of discontinuation of the plague bonus. Gandhi asked the worker to go on a strike and demand a 35% increase in wages. The employers were willing to concede a 20% bonus only. Gandhi advised the workers to remain non-violent while on strike. He undertook a fast unto death to strengthen the workers' resolve. Mill owners finally agreed to give the workers a 35% increase in the wages. Satyagraha against Rowlatt Act. First mass strike. Rowlatt Act 1919, passed by the Imperial Legislative Council in Delhi on March 18, 1919. Extension of Defence India Act 1915, also known as Black Act or Draconian Act, was mainly aimed to look into the militant nationalist activities. Any person could be arrested on the basis of suspicion. They gave enormous powers to the police to search a place and arrest any person they disapproved of without warrant. No appeal or petition could be filed against such arrest for up to 2 years. A well-known description of the bill at that time was no dalil, no vakil, no appeal, no pleas, no lawyer, no appeal. Gandhi called for a nationwide protest against the draconian law. In February 19, Gandhi organized a Satyagraha Sabha and roped into young members of Home Rule Leagues and the Pan-Islamists. The form of the protest finally chosen included observance of a nationwide hartal strike accompanied by fasting and prayer and civil disobedience against specific laws and quoting arrest and imprisonment. There was a radical change in the national movement by now. The masses had found a direction. Now they could act instead of just giving verbal expression to their grievances. From now onwards, peasants, artisans, and the urban poor were to play an increasingly important part in the struggle. Orientation of the national movement turned to the masses permanently. Jallianwala Bagh, April 13, 1919. In Punjab, there was an unprecedented support to the Rowlatt Satyagraha. Facing a violent situation and suspected insurrection, a government called in large number of military troops. Military was led by the Brig General Dyer. General Dyer banned all public meetings and detained the political leaders. On the Baishakhi day, a large crowd of people, mostly from neighboring villages, unaware of the prohibitory orders in the city, had assembled. They had gathered in this small park to protest against the arrest of their leaders, Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal. The army surrounded the gathering under orders from General Dyer. They blocked the only exit point and opened fire on the unarmed crowd. This resulted in nationwide protest against the massacre. Even London newspaper criticized the government for the act. Rabindranath Tagore renounced his knighthood as a protest. Gandhi was overwhelmed by atmosphere of violence and withdrew the Rowlatt Satyagraha movement on April 18, 1919. The British government released figures stating that 379 dead and 1200 wounded. Other sources place the number of dead at well over 1000. This brutality stunned the entire nation, resulting in a wrenching loss of faith of the general public in the intentions of the UK. The ineffective inquiry and the initial accolades for the Dyer by the House of Lords fueled the widespread anger. The note, the governor of the Punjab at that time, Michael O. Dyer, supported the massacre. He was shot dead by Udham Singh, a revolutionary in London in 1940. তারপর আসছে মন্টেগিউ ক্লেমসফোর্ড রিফর্ম অফ 1919, গভর্নমেন্ট অফ ইন্ডিয়া অ্যাক্ট অফ 1919, মন্টফোর্ড রিফর্মস. Secretary of State for India, Edwin Montagu, আর Governor General and Viceroy, Lord Chelmsford. The most notable feature of the act was the end of the benevolent despotism and introduction of responsible government in India. But in reality, it didn't give any responsible government. On August 20, 1917, Secretary of the State Montagu made a historic declaration in the House of Commons in British Parliament, which is called Montagu Declaration. In November 7, 1917, Montagu had visited to India to ascertain views from all sections of polity. A detailed report of on constitutional reforms in India, Montfort Reform, was published on 8 July 1918. This report became the basis of Government of India Act of 1919. Key features of this report were as follows: increasing association of Indians in every branch of administration, gradual development of self-governing institution with a view to progressive realization of responsible government in India as an integral part of the British Empire. Progress towards responsible government in successive stages. INC held a special session with Syed Hassan Imam as president in August 1918 to discuss the report. Highlights of the 1919 Act: India to remain as an integral part of the British, no self-rule to India, gradual decentralization of authority with loosening the supreme hold of the central government, suggested a decentralized but unitary form of government. The time and the manner towards goal of responsible government will be decided by the British Parliament. Partial responsibility in provinces to Indians, but no change in character of the central government. Changes: provincial government, executive হচ্ছে কি executive diarchy was introduced. There were two classes of administration: executive councillors and ministers. The governor was the executive head of the province. The subjects were divided into two lists: reserve and transfer list. Reserve list হচ্ছে with the British minister. The governor was in charge of the reserve list along with his executive councillors. The subject under this list were law and order, irrigations, finance, land revenue, etc. Transfer list with the Indian ministers. The elected members of the council in the charge of subject under the transfer list. The subjects included were education, local government, health, excise, industry, public works, religious endowments, etc. The Indian ministers were responsible to the people who elected them through legislature. These ministers were nominated from among the elected members of the Legislative Council. The executive councillors were not responsible to the legislature, unlike the ministers. The Secretary of the State and the Governor General could interfere in matters under the reserve list, but this interference was restricted for the transfer list. Legislature: the size of the provincial legislative assembly was increased. Now 70% of the members were elected. There were communal and class electorates. Direct elections of the members but restricted franchising. Some women could also vote. This was the first time women was also allowed to vote in India. Legislators enjoyed freedom of speech. The governor's assent was required to pass any bill. He also had veto power and could issue ordinances also. So final power was still in the hand of governor. Ordinance started from here. Executive, central government. Executive, the chief executive authority was the Governor General, Viceroy. There was two lists for administration, central and provincial. The provincial list was under the provinces, while the center took care of the central list. Out of 8 members of the Viceroy's executive council, 3 were to be Indian members. The Governor General could issue ordinances. He could also certify bills that were rejected by the central legislature. He retained the power to summon and dissolve the house. Legislature: a bicameral legislature was set up with 2 houses since the number of members increased, so it had to be bifurcated in 2 houses: Central Legislative Assembly, Lower House, the forerunner of the Lok Sabha. Initially the Central Legislative Council, because of the some small numbers of members, now number of members increased, so it became Assembly. Council of State, Upper House, forerunner of the Rajya Sabha. Members of the Legislative Assembly, the nominated members were nominated by the Governor General and the Governor General from Anglo-Indians and Indian Christians. Anglo-Indians and Christians were nominated among 15 non-officials, where other Indians were also nominated. The members had a tenure of 3 years, could be extended by Governor General. Members of the Council of State, only male members, tenure of 5 years. Members of the Council of State who could vote for these elections. Franchisee was restricted. Voters have paid land revenue of 50 annually, or have property worth rupees 180 rentals, or have been paying income tax of rupees 2000. Further for Council of State, only title holders, ex-members of the council and uni-senate members were eligible. All this narrowed the number of people who could vote to an abysmal number. For lower house 9 lakh, for upper house 17,000 members. Right in the legislature, the legislature could ask questions and also vote a part of the budget. Only 25% of the budget was subject to vote. Rent was non-votable. A bill had to pass in both the houses before it became a law. There were 3 measures to resolve any deadlock between both the houses: joint committees, joint conferences, and joint sittings. Governor General powers in the legislature. The Governor General assent was required for any bill to become a law, even both houses have passed it. He could also enact a bill without the legislature consent. He could prevent a bill from becoming a law if deemed it as detrimental to the peace of the country. He could disallow any question, adjournment, motion, or debate in the House. Indian Council based in London. There were to be at least 8 and maximum of 12 members in the council. Half of the members should have 10 years of experience in public service in India. Indian members in the council increased from 2 to 3. It also created an office of the High Commissioner for India to act as the agent of the Governor General of India in London. The salary of Secretary of the State for India to be paid by the government of Britain now. Other salient features: this act provided for the first time the establishment of the Public Service Commission in India. The act also provided for that after 10 years a statutory commission would be set up to study the working of this government. This resulted the Simon Commission of 1927. Merits of the 1919 Act: the Government Act 1919 marked the end of the policy of the benevolent despotism and thus began the genesis of the responsible government in India. Though they declared the ending of the benevolent despotism, but still Governor General or Viceroy withheld a lot of power. This act indeed became a foundation upon which present Indian legislature is working. Diarchy introduced the concept of responsible government. It introduced the concept of the federal structure with a unitary basis. There was increased participation of Indians in the administration. They held some portfolios like labor, health, etc. For the first time, elections were known to the people and it created a political consciousness among the people. Some Indian women also had the right to vote for the first time. Limitation of the act: this act extended and consolidated communal representation. Franchisee was very limited. Only those people who had property, taxable income and paid high land revenue were entitled to vote. The Governor General and Viceroy and the governors had a lot of power to determine the legislatures at the centers and the provinces respectively. Allocations of the seats for the central legislature was not based on population but the importance of the province in the eyes of the British. Note, the Rowlatt Act was passed in 1919 which severely restricted press and movements of the people. Despite the unanimous opposition of Indian leaders of the Legislative Council, the bills were passed. Several Indian members resigned in the protest. The Indian objection to Montagu claims for reform: no specific time frame was given for awarding of responsible government. The government alone was to decide the nature and the timing of the advance towards a responsible government. The Indians were resentful that the British would decide what was good and what was bad for Indians. Khilafat movement 1919 to 1922. Main cause ki chilo: defeat of the Turkey in the First World War, dethroning of the Ottoman Emperor who was the Khalifa of the Islamic world, and harsh term of the Treaty of Serbs 1920. The treaty terms was felt by the Muslim as a great insult to them. The whole movement was based on the Muslim belief that the Caliph, Sultan of Turkey, was religious head of the Muslim all over the world. Prominent leader of this movement, Maulana Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, Johar brothers, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Mukhtar Ansari, Saifuddin Kichlu. Subsequently, the Khilafat movement merged with the non-cooperation movement launched by the Mahatma Gandhi in 1920. Ultimately, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk abolished the office of the Sultan Caliph. He overthrew the Ottoman rule to establish a pro-Western, a secular republic in independent Turkey. Non-cooperation movement 1920 to 22 started by Gandhiji, not Congress. On 1st August 1920, aim ki chilo Swaraj, though not clear, justice for Jallianwala Bagh massacre, especially action against General Dyer, support Khilafat movement. It was approved by the INC at the Nagpur session in December 1920. The amendment of in INC Constitution by Gandhi, formation of Congress Working Party, formation of PCC, Provincial Working Committee, formation of the executive in every province. Special features of the non-cooperation movement began with the Mahatma Gandhi renouncing the medals given by the British, surrender of titles or honorary positions, along with the resignation of membership from the local bodies. Boycott of elections held under the provisions of the 1919 Act. Legislatures were boycotted. No leaders of the Congress came forward to contest the election for the legislature. Boycott of government functions, courts, government schools and colleges, boycott of foreign goods and popularizing Swadeshi goods and Khadi. People were asked not to serve in the British Army, establishment of national school, colleges and private panchayat courts. The movement was essentially a peaceful and non-violent protest against the British government in India. It was also planned that if the above steps did not bring result, people would refuse to pay their taxes. Non-cooperation থেকে civil disobedience movement হয়েছিল. The INC also demanded Swaraj or self-government openly. The non-cooperation movement was a decisive step in the independence movement because for the first time INC was ready to forego constitutional means to achieve self-rule. Swaraj. Gandhiji had assured that the Swaraj would be achieved in a year if this movement was continued to completion. Suspension of non-cooperation movement on 5th February 1922 in Chaurichara, Gorakhpur, Uttar Pradesh. A violent mob set fire to a police station, killing 22 policemen Indian during a clash between the police and the protesters. Gandhiji called off the movement on 12 February 1922 in the wake of the Chauri Chara incident. Gandhiji said people were not ready for revolt against the government through ahimsa. A lot of leaders like Motilal Nehru and Chittaranjan Das were against the suspension of the movement only due to sporadic incident of the violence. Gandhiji jailed for 2 years after the suspension. Result and significance of the non-cooperation movement. Swaraj was not achieved in 1 year as Gandhiji had told. However, it was truly fast mass movement where lack of Indians participated in the open protest against the government through peaceful means, except Chauri Chara incident. It shook the British government, who were stunned by the extent of the movement. It saw participation from both Hindus and Muslims, thereby showcasing communal harmony in the country. These movements established the popularity of the INC among the people. As a result of this movement, people became conscious of the political rights. They were not afraid of the government anymore. The consciousness was initially limited to the Swadeshi movement of Bengal. Hordes of the people thrown to the jails willingly. The Indian merchants and the mill owners enjoyed good profit during this period as a result of the boycott of British goods. Khadi and charka was promoted. The import of sugar from British reduced considerably during this period. This movement also established Gandhiji as a leader of the masses.